What's up, everybody? How are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today I finally get to realize a long-lived dream and make a video discussing what I believe are the 10 best games on the Atari Jaguar. Now, a few months ago, I did have a reason to touch on the Atari Jaguar and my fanship of the console. It was a lot of fun to be able to do, but I've also always wanted to do something a little bit more significant. And while I'm not finally making my hour-and-a-half long documentary about the Atari Jaguar and the Jaguar CD and the history of the console, I am finally finding a reason to be able to just make a nice, straightforward top 10 list. And of course, I do want to give a shout out to a friend of mine, RGT85 Sean Long, who recently made a video about the 10 best games to play on the Sega Saturn, which is kind of his personal fanboy favorite console, which I very much appreciate. I own a Saturn myself, and I also very much enjoy it. And a few weeks ago, him and I had a little fun back and forth chat where I mentioned that his Saturn video kind of inspired me to finally make this video where I wanted to talk about what I think are the best games to play on the Atari Jaguar. Now, it's worth noting before we hop into the list here why the Atari Jaguar is so important to me and why it's also so weird. It's one of those consoles that came out during the weird but also really fun time in the mid-90s where it seemed like every company under the sun was trying to hop into the very popular and ever-growing video game industry and the console race. Anyone old enough to have remembered this time, whether you were a kid or a teenager like myself, or even a little bit older than that, you might remember that the 90s was the crazy Wild West period for gaming, and so many companies tried their hand at video game consoles. Atari, of course, is one of the oldest companies in the video game industry, and they predate all of that stuff, but the Atari Jaguar represented their last, final big attempt to stay relevant in the hardware space. Its big claim to fame was the fact that it claimed to be the world's first 64-bit system. And while I'm no tech guru, there are plenty of people out there who've broken down exactly why that's not really true, and they kind of flubbed the math, so to speak, on how they actually were able to quantify it as a 64-bit machine, when in truth it really wasn't. It was, however, much more powerful than its direct 16-bit competitors, the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis, and the TurboGrafx-16 was out there as well. So much so that when the Atari Jaguar did have a strong developer behind one of its games and they really pushed the hardware, they could make very excellent looking 3D polygons and 3D games with some really awesome visuals. Stuff that definitely couldn't be done by the 16-bit competitors. If you compare the original Star Fox, which to me is a perfect, amazing game, visually, we're only talking visuals here, to some of the more impressive 3D polygon games on the Jaguar, you can see better graphics on the Jaguar than what the Super Nintendo was ultimately capable of in the 3D polygonal space. But because the architecture was so strange for the Jaguar, it ended up having a lot of games that mostly looked and felt like 16-bit games, and even had some really high-profile third-party ports to the Jaguar that were also featured on the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis at the time. Eventually, and against all odds and against all logic, they did manage to push out the long-rumored Jaguar CD, which was a CD add-on peripheral to the Atari Jaguar, trying to do what Sega did with the Sega CD, for example, as other consoles that also became competition for the Jaguar, like the PlayStation and Saturn, were coming out. CD disc-based gaming was becoming a very big deal at the time, and Atari, while getting out their Jaguar cartridge system, also wanted to fight against that new technology with their own CD add-on peripheral. And considering the fact that the Jaguar struggled with sales and quality games out of the gate, it is mind-boggling, and it defies all possible reason that the Jaguar CD launched, but it did launch, and I think it's pretty cool, and I'm even proud to say that I'm somebody who owns a working Jaguar CD, which is very rare, and I do enjoy playing it from time to time. Now, an even lesser-known fact is that at the time, Atari was also pumping up the world for a Jaguar VR headset. That's right, Atari was trying to take the Jaguar of all consoles into virtual reality, and we are talking mid-90s virtual reality. It was insane what they were trying to do, but it was very cool, and man, as a teenager who was following this through video game magazines at the time, It was so exciting, and I wanted it to be real because I had and owned and really enjoyed a Jaguar. The Jaguar CD even showed up in physical form at CES back in the day. It wasn't a vaporware piece of hardware. It was real tech that Atari was working on. But of course, with the Jaguar struggling out of the gate and the Jaguar CD performing even worse than that, sadly, the Jaguar VR had no real chance at ever releasing. And so with that out of the way, I want to hop into the list of what I think are the 10 best games on the Jaguar. Of course, this is not meant to be an official list. I'm just a fan who loves the Jaguar consoles, despite the fact that they really just weren't the best. But I also know that there is a very sizable list of quality hidden gem games on this console, so I'm excited to talk about these games as a fan. So before I jump into the top 10, I want to mention 5 quick honorable mentions. Skyhammer is a fantastic 3D polygonal game finished by the fans. Ultra Vortec is a clunky but quality Mortal Kombat ripoff. Valdecir Skiing and Snowboarding is a really excellent, pretty fun to play skiing and snowboard racing game. Wolfenstein 3D is a fantastic port of Wolfenstein at the time. And then of course, Primal Rage on the Jaguar CD is a really good, high quality port of the Primal Rage arcade game that came to the Jaguar CD. And so with that, let's jump into the 10 best games. And we're going to do this just in alphabetical order. This is not a ranking. We're going alphabetical. And first and foremost, coincidentally, happens to be what is widely considered to be the killer app for the console, the best game on the console. And I would agree with that. It is Alien vs. Predator, which is a really unique, very impressive first-person shooter for the time that it released on the Atari Jaguar. This game featured digitized characters and models of a colonial marine, of an alien character, and of a predator character, and even the environments are the same way. This game looks fantastic. It is very slow by today's standards for sure, and without having a true strafe, you can use the keypad to strafe, but it was still very awkward. It does become kind of a clunky game to play, but at the end of the day, it was beautiful. First-person games were very exciting and new and fresh at the time. And the fact that this game managed to release with a very popular license, Aliens and Predators all in one game, was very impressive. It also boasts 3 campaigns. Not only is this an Alien vs. Predator game where you can play as a Marine with a shotgun and a flamethrower, you can also play as an Alien character or a Predator character, and there are even different environments to represent both of them. This game was awesome, and it was also bloody terrifying. This game featured crazy tension because there is no music, there's just the ambient sounds of a derelict spaceship. It is so cool. Love this game to death. Easily the best game on the Jaguar. The next game I want to talk about is Atari Karts, which, as you can see, was the Jaguar's answer to Super Mario Kart, which was the only Mario Kart game at the time. And I gotta tell you, this game really flew under the radar. It's fantastic. It features really, really great graphics. It honestly, if we're being honest, I think it looks better than Mario Kart. Obviously, it doesn't play near as well. Nothing compares to the original Super Mario Kart. But if we're talking just technically, and it should be this way because the Jaguar was more powerful, this game looks beautiful and it does play well. It is a very, very fun and competent racing game. The trickiest part is that all of the debris and rocks and stuff littered throughout the courses features these flat Mode 7 graphics. And since they're not 3D, it becomes very awkward when you get stuck on those things and very hard to get yourself unstuck from all of this stuff littered throughout the course. But once you get used to that, you know how to dodge and avoid that stuff and take advantage of the actually pretty good controls. This game is a ton of fun, and like I said, it's beautiful, and it has great music, so I highly recommend Atari Karts. Attack of the Mutant Penguins is one of the weirdest games on this console, but it is really, really fun. It's kind of like a puzzle, strategy, platformer kind of game, definitely featuring more of a 16-bit look to the visuals, as you can tell by watching this footage here. But it was also a little bit prettier than I think you'd see on most 16-bit consoles as well. This game is really hard and challenging, and trying to save the penguins and not make them get destroyed was very strange, featuring these alien creatures. It's just a weird acid trip kind of a game, but it is pretty. Regrettably, there's no music. I always thought that was very strange, but it's just a weird, funny game that's oddly dark and kind of gory because of the penguins getting destroyed so often. So I don't know, this is a very, very strange game, but it's really a blast, and it's one of the most unique exclusive games to the Jaguar. So another game I recommend, Attack of the Mutant Penguins. Next up is the only Jaguar CD exclusive game I want to talk about, and it is Battlemorph, which is a sequel to the Jaguar launch title called Cybermorph. Cybermorph tried to be a Star Fox clone, and it was okay, but man, is it really hard to control that game. And the layout, the topography of the maps you play was not very friendly to flying and having fun. Cybermorph fixed a lot of that. It looks and controls and sounds way, way better, partly aided by the fact that it was on the Jaguar CD. But they also created just, again, better topography so you could fly around a little bit more conveniently, and you could even go underwater, and I can't stress how really good the music is in Battlemorph. So I don't know. I think this is a game that was underappreciated, but I think that Battlemorph is really fantastic, so it makes the list of one of the 10 best games. Widely considered to be one of the best console ports of the classic Doom, that definitely has to make the list. It's very well known that the Jaguar port of Doom doesn't have any music, and it's so frustrating because it would actually become one of the best versions of the game to play, period, if it did. However, if we step aside from the fact that there's no music, the port of Doom on the Jaguar is fantastic. It features the graphics and playability that's much closer to the original PC port, and it's much, much better than the version you could play on the Super Nintendo, for example. And I don't know what to say. It's Doom. It's a classic game. This game was revolutionary for its time. It looked fantastic. And the Jaguar port is really, really excellent. And so, of course, Doom is one of the best games you can play on the Jaguar. A game that I think most people will disagree with me on is Fight for Life, which was the Jaguar's attempt at cloning Virtua Fighter. You might notice that the Jaguar had some really interesting exclusive attempts at cloning games like Mario Kart and Star Fox and first-person games like Doom and whatnot. And also, here's Virtua Fighter. Except, unlike the Sega Virtua Fighter that didn't really feature textures on those polygon characters, the Jaguar game Fight for Life did feature those textures, which made it stand out visually. Now, this game is very slow, very hard to control, and it is hard to pull off the super moves. But honestly, I still really love this game. I was really happy with the fact that I had a very beautiful 3D polygon game to play on my Jaguar at the time, and it features an interesting mechanic where as you defeat your opponents, you actually gain their special moveset, and that's a very unique thing that I wish other fighting games would start to adopt. So this game was a tad revolutionary in that respect. It's a very hard game to get good at, but if you really spend time with it and get used to the slower speed, it's a lot of fun. And again, it was beautiful for a console game at the time when Virtua Fighter was blowing up arcades. So a lot of people don't like this game. It's one of the last games that ever released on the Jaguar in '95, but I'm telling you, I love this game, and you cannot deny how kick-ass that opening theme song is. Now, I'm going to cheat the rules for my next two games here, and first up is going to be Hover Strike. And I'm actually considering both the Atari Jaguar Hover Strike and the Jaguar CD Hover Strike Unconquered Lands because I think they're both so excellent and they're both pretty similar. Part of the reason I enjoy talking about these games is because these were other games that showcased what the power of the Jaguar and Jaguar CD could be when developers spent time with it. Again, this is a fully 3D game in a fully 3D space featuring, at the time, very impressive polygons, again, fully textured. That was a big difference when looking at polygonal games in the early 3D days. The Hover Strike games are really just space shooters where you're in a hovercraft landing on different planets trying to blow up specific items and fight enemies and collect power-ups, and you just do that. It's a weird game in the sense that the controls are almost really good, but they're also kind of frustrating because the cockpit takes up like half of the view of the screen. And also, as your hovercraft goes over bumps and hills and little ridges and whatnot, the way the screen forces you to look up into the space and then completely lose any sense of where you are until the visuals of the planet come crashing into view as you straighten out. It's very strange and it's very disorienting, but you get used to it. And I just think that these are just really fun, mindless games that were pretty for their day. Both games are great. And the Jaguar CD version featured some pretty neat little kind of CG cutscenes there. And so, yeah, these are just fun space shooters. I highly recommend both Hover Strike games. And here is my second cheat, and I'm going to do the same thing with the Iron Soldier games. There was Iron Soldier on the Jaguar, and there was Iron Soldier 2 on the Jaguar CD. And easily, these are two of the best games on the Jaguar. Again, we're looking at 3D polygonal space. This is something that the Jaguar would do every once in a while, and this was a time where it was impressive to do so. Not a whole lot of textures in these games, as you can see, but these games were fun mech action games. The controls were very strange and took a lot of getting used to, and you really needed to rely on the keypad for a lot of the controls and the weapon switching. But it was a ton of fun. These were just mission-based mech action games. Every once in a while, you would come across another mech that you had to defeat. And they definitely get pretty hard. These missions really get difficult the later on you go in both games. But it's a ton of fun. The Jaguar CD sequel, Iron Soldier 2, featured some really impressive CG cutscenes. It also featured more missions and more weapons and items. I just don't know what to say. These are really clunky games, like many Jaguar games, but a lot of fun when you spend the time to get good at them. So yeah, these are two of my favorite games on the Jaguar, Iron Soldier and Iron Soldier 2. The next game we have to talk about is Rayman, which to this day is still one of my favorite games I've ever played, the original Rayman, which, yes, released on the PlayStation and the Saturn, but also got a Jaguar port. Now, I spent time with both the PlayStation and the Jaguar version back in the day when it released on both consoles, and it immediately stood out as one of the coolest games I'd ever seen because these graphics, you guys, at the time were mind-blowing. Even though it's a 2D game, this cartoonish, hand-drawn sort of style, even though it's not truly hand-drawn, it looked like a living, moving cartoon in a way that we had never seen. And so I just fell in love with the character, I fell in love with the world, the graphics, the gameplay and platforming is top-notch for its day. It is incredibly fun and controls very, very well. Now, I will say, the PlayStation and Saturn version features absolutely spectacular, high-quality music. The Jaguar version, and this is strange because the Jaguar actually featured a really impressive sound chip in it. It could do really impressive sound, but they did not succeed on the music front for the Jaguar version, and that is the one thing that really holds it back. The graphics matched up almost perfectly with the PlayStation and Saturn version, but the music, not so much. However, the gameplay is almost identical otherwise. And the last game we have to talk about when it comes to the 10 best games I personally think you can play on the Atari Jaguar is Tempest 2000. And this is a game everyone knows is one of the best games on the Jaguar. And plenty of people think that it is the best game on the Jaguar. And the Tempest series goes back a long time. It goes back to the arcades. And it's just a point-based, weird space shooter where you're going around these geometric wireframe shapes, similar to like the very old Star Wars arcade game and what those graphics look like. And you're shooting and blowing up things, and you're trying to rack up combos and points and scores and just do the best you can. However, it is really fast-paced, really frenetic, very addicting, visually pleasing. Even though it's not like mind-blowing graphics because it's using that wireframe style, it still looks great because of all the popping and exploding and particles and things moving around the screen, and your points and your scores are racking up the better you do and the faster you move. And the Jaguar Tempest 2000 game featured these really cool kind of trippy graphics and visuals that would pop in for some of the levels. And unlike Rayman with its unimpressive music, this game featured fantastic thumping techno music that was really impressive. So impressive that they even released a soundtrack to this game on CD that you could play. That's how great the music was to this game. One of the best games on the Jaguar. Plenty of people think it is the best game on the Jaguar, so obviously Tempest 2000 had to make this list. So that's my breakdown of what I think are the 10 best games that you can play on the Atari Jaguar, and a couple of honorable mentions. And it's worth noting, something I want to leave you guys with is that there are even more games that are worthy of being considered honorable mentions. I would say there's about 20 to 25 games that are really, really good on the Jaguar and worth being a part of your collection if you own one. The Jaguar represents one of my favorite times in gaming, the golden age in the mid-90s when Sega and Nintendo were going at it with two of the best consoles ever made, but while at the same time in the background, plenty of other companies were coming out with some weird consoles and weird attempts at video games. Atari, one of the most important companies in the industry of all time, also did the same thing. The Jaguar was their last attempt at making a big name for themselves in the modern era of gaming. 3D-based gaming, 16-based gaming. They wanted to be seen as 64-bit way before the Nintendo came out with the Nintendo 64. And they didn't really succeed. It's a shame that it didn't do better than it did, but I found myself with one at the time, and I just loved it. I loved talking about it, I loved defending it to my friends, and I loved playing it. And I had a ton of games back in the day, and I'm glad that I still have a ton of games on the Jaguar and Jaguar CD that I own today. So, you know, long live the Jaguar. It didn't do what it was supposed to do, but I'm a huge fan of it. And there is a very strong fan base out there still today who love the Jaguar and the Jaguar CD. And since these games, these systems are available in the public domain, fans are even still making games for the Jaguar and Jaguar CD. To me, that's pretty cool, and it shows the dedication that this fan base has for these consoles. So that's my video. That's my breakdown in my list. I love the Jaguar. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Share what you think below, and I'll see you guys on another video. Bye-bye.